What's up, everybody? I'm John Middlekauff. You know what I need you to do. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We got content for days reacting to every NFL game all the time, every single day. Subscribe, like the videos. Let's go. What is happening, everybody? How are we doing? Hopefully everyone is having a beautiful day wherever you may be, enjoying yourself, hanging out, listening to a little podcast, watching a podcast. And luckily for you, there's a lot going on because we had some massive contract extensions, which I want to dive into. I've had some time to think about whether it be the Stingley contract extension with Houston, which set a record, to the Cincinnati Bengals, giving, I think we don't have the exact Tee Higgins number, but fair to say, give or take, around $200 million guaranteed to the two wide receivers. Kirk Cousins is currently in a staring contest with Arthur Blank because pride and ego is a powerful thing. And when you take an L, it's very, very hard for you just to kind of say, I lost and move on. So we will dive into that situation as well as a couple other things football-wise going around. I gave an initial reaction on Monday morning. I got up early to watch Rory McIlroy, who won the Players, which I gave a live reaction to, as well as the Tee Higgins Jamar Chase contract. Just initial reaction. I've given it a little time to marinate and have some thoughts. So you can check those videos out, and we will dive deeper into it here. But before we do, I do got to tell you about my friends, my partners, and the official ticketing app of this podcast. They happen to go by Gametime. And as many of you know, I just got married. And I was in Nashville for probably a couple days too long. A lot of partying, a lot of drinking, and a lot of love. But while we were there, a lot of people that were at the wedding, a lot of our friends and family, basically took a vacation there as well. And someone was like, hey, the Predators have like multiple games while we're staying here? I'm like, well, you should go. I can't make it, but go to the game. It's like, okay, where should I get tickets? I'm like, well, download the Gametime app. And you can search by where you want to sit, the price point in terms of where you want to sit. It gives you incredible ability to like check out what your view would look like. And they had a blast. And I think they went to Predators, played, forget who they were playing, but I cannot recommend it enough. So if you want to go to a hockey game, if you want to go, the baseball season's right around the corner. You get the NBA playoffs, a March Madness game if your team starts making a little run here. Obviously, concerts, comedy shows, you name it. Any event you want to go to, get on it. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code JOHN for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use the code JOHN for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. One thing with the draft right around the corner, you will hear a lot, and I think it's one of the most laughable kind of narratives every single April, is some guys have a really, really high floor. And I think that's very easy to say, and I understand sometimes why it's said. But no one has any clue what a player's ceiling will be and what a player's floor will be, despite their physical characteristics at 19, 20, 21 years old playing in college football. No one knew that Jason Kelce would be a Hall of Famer, or he wouldn't have been picked in the 6th round. Same thing with his brother. I'm just using those two examples because they popped into my head. But I'll use a current example. A couple years ago, everyone was like, Zach Wilson has a special skill set. Now, because of BYU, the COVID season, it's hard to truly judge how good he is because of the level of competition they're playing, but his skill set is pretty special. No one argued. Mac Jones, loaded team, excelled in 2020, kind of a fugazi season, but has a lot of characteristics of just like solid quarterbacks, has a much higher floor. One guy went 2, the other guy could have gone 3 if Kyle Shanahan would have pulled the trigger, ended up going 15. And the reality is, 5 years later, they're both in the same spot, both making $5-6 million to be backups. No one has any clue. But some guys have higher skill sets than others. So if they do hit, and when I say they don't have any clue, we don't know who's going to be good and bad because so much determines that. You're all the intangible stuff that no matter how hard you scout, you don't know. And when you look at the Houston Texans, like they took some shit because when they took Derek Stingley, the safe pick was Sauce Gardner. And honestly, early on in that race, they looked like idiots because the first 2 years, Sauce Gardner was a first team All Pro. And as an NFL executive told me this year, you know what happened, John? They started not swallowing the whistle. They started calling some of that bump and run might be a little too physical penalty. Sauce isn't the greatest athlete in the league. He's not Deion Sanders or Darrelle Revis or Derek Stingley. So if he is not allowed to be extra physical, some of the man-to-man situations can be a problem. He can't run for stride for stride with some of the elites. You know who can? Stingley, one of the best athletes in the last 3 or 4 drafts. But when Nick Caserio pulled the trigger and drafted him third overall over Sauce, who was the much safer pick, and like I said, early on in their career, was the better player, people went, Caserio, this guy hasn't even been good in college the last couple of years. Because remember, in 2019, one of the greatest college football teams of all time, the LSU Tigers, Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Derek Stingley. Well, Derek Stingley was a true freshman, and he looked like Deion Sanders, Darrelle Revis that year. Then the next couple of years got weird. The Ed Ogeron program kind of fell apart, and he was caught up in the middle of it. And I've said forever, most guys are followers. Most guys cannot rise above problems. It's why you see college players that get caught in situations that are unraveling, like when a program is going the wrong way, get caught up in it. I remember he's actually a GM now, told me about Hufanga. He's like, the one thing with Hufanga, who was part of the USC program when it was a shit show with Clay Helton, they weren't winning a lot. He's like, he was probably the only guy. Because a lot of times when you're losing, coaches and people around the program won't have positive things to say about guys because it's easy for guys to kind of fall into a negative mindset. And I wouldn't even say be part of the problem, but just be caught up in all the crap. And Hufanga was an example. It's like, yeah, he just kind of rose above it. You never heard one negative thing about him. And that's not normal. And he still played at a high level. Now, Hufanga didn't have the talent level of Stingley, but Stingley got caught up in it all. Didn't play well. And Caserio went, you know what? I'm swinging for the fences. And here's the thing, when you swing for the fences, which I advocate toward always, because a high floor guy can bust just as easily as a super high talented guy. At least give yourself an opportunity. Like that high floor guy, Mac Jones, even if he hit, never had the opportunity to be a top 5 quarterback. He physically did not possess the gifts, right? So when you swing for Derek Stingley, it might go wrong. He might just be another one of those corners who washed out of the league in 5 or 6 years. Or he becomes a first-team All-Pro and a guy that can go stride for stride and mirror any wide receiver in the NFL. And you watch him this year, it's like, Jesus. For as like bad as CJ Stroud played, this guy looked like this guy's a star. So I just think that when drafts come, you have to be okay with, I might miss on the pick no matter what. So let's go for the guy with the best traits, with the greatest gifts. And that's what Stingley possessed. And it took him a couple years, but when he figured it out, you go, is that him or Surtain the best corner in the NFL? So when you see that they give him a historic deal today, and they give him almost $90 million guaranteed, like that's what they were shooting for. And that's the best case scenario. And he hit it. So props to Caserio for pulling the trigger when he did on that player because it worked. And it's always cool. Like, I like ballsy picks. And sometimes they don't work. Sometimes they blow up in your face. But you can't be scared, especially drafting high, right? When you have the pick of the litter. It's one thing when, you're like the Rams or the Chiefs or the Bills. Like, you only have so many options when you're picking 23, 28, 30, right? When you're picking in the top 5 or 6, you have the majority of the draft there, right? Like it's a difficult decision, and you got to, like, it's really kind of comes down to philosophically what you believe in. Do you want to play it safe, or do you want to put all the chips in the middle of the table? And when it came to defensive backs, that's what Caserio did over Sauce Gardner, and I think he got it right because, and I'm not anti-Sauce, but if the referees are going to be aggressive with their PI calls, and his physicality, it ain't even close. There is not a general manager in the NFL, and that includes whoever the new guy is with the Jets, who wouldn't take Stingley over Sauce Gardner. So that's where we're at. When it comes to college basketball and March Mania, one thing is for sure: nothing's for sure. Upsets, buzzer beaters, Cinderellas, top seeds going home early. It's all going to happen. Bet the unexpected. Every upset, every day with DraftKings Sportsbook. With live betting, exclusive content, promos, and parlays, DraftKings is the ultimate college basketball destination for March. Ready to make your first bet? Check out matchups and pick a team to win. It's that simple. First time, here's something special just for you. New DraftKings customers bet $5 to get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Bet the unexpected with DraftKings Sportsbook. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app. Use the code JOHN, that's J-O-H-N. That's code JOHN for new customers to get $200 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. The Bengals. I've had some time to think about this, and I think Stingley falls under this too. You feel much better about giving massive amounts of money to guys you've drafted. Why? Because you know them really well. You have spent years around not the player, but the human being. Because in football, you meet, you lift, you're just sitting in the facility way more than you're on the field and playing NFL football. So you spend more time around Jamar Chase and Tee Higgins and Joe Burrow and all these guys, the human beings, than you do, quote unquote, the players. Now, it's all intertwined, right? They're lifting, they're studying, like it's all part of the package. But when you give a contract, right or wrong, because I hesitate to say, that's a great deal. Like Jamar Chase, no problem. Jamar Chase could play any era, anytime, be an elite. I mean, Jamar Chase, I'm not alone saying this, might be, I don't know, how many players are better at football than Jamar Chase in the NFL, including quarterbacks? I mean, is he one of the top 5 or 6, 7 most talented individual players in the NFL? I think he is. And you keep the whole point of a draft is to find a Jamar Chase and then keep that guy on your team as long as humanly possible, especially if he's healthy and playing at an elite level. I think sometimes when you get a redundant position, you go, like, let's use the Texans, for example. If they had a Derek Stingley and then another guy who wouldn't make 89 guaranteed, but maybe would be like 55, 60 guaranteed, you know what they probably would do? They would trade that player. Because is it awesome having 2 lockdown corners? Of course it is. Is it great business to have all your money into a position on the perimeter? I think it's pretty risky. And I would say the same thing about this. Tee Higgins, clearly high-level cat, productive. I mean, he was banged up last year, missed a bunch of games, still had 10 touchdowns. So if you combine the two guys, they scored 27 touchdowns, the two of them. And he has an incredible rapport with the quarterback. And the quarterback, I don't think he's just beating the drum to give him an extension because he wants him to be rich. I think he wants to win, and he thinks his best chance to win is with this player, and I don't blame him for thinking that. But I do think when you look at the totality of what you have to compete against in the conference, which is Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, and Lamar Jackson, and I'd even say I think the Chargers are coming, they would never do that. They would never allocate that many resources to 2 wide receivers because it's just bad business. And this is where I think the Bengals passed and I talked about this when I did the reaction video, is like, I think Mike Brown's pretty rattled because the talk of like, could Joe Burrow in like a year or two be like, I can't be here anymore, I want out. And typically you'd say, listen, it's football, the organization has more juice, like this isn't the NBA. And you go, well, he had a situation 15 plus years ago with Carson Palmer, and he was like, I'm not playing for you anymore. And he just quit on him, and he was just gone. And that happened. I don't ever quite remember that happening at that level with a player of that, ability at that position. I mean, it had to kind of scar you. And I think Joe Burrow is, I would take, a young Joe Burrow over Carson Palmer. And Carson Palmer is fucking incredible. I mean, Carson Palmer was awesome. But I just think you have to make this guy happy. And they're in this weird NBA situation. Like, I totally understood forever in LeBron's prime. Like, yeah, do what he wanted to. He's the best player in the league. Like, if Giannis wants something, I'd listen to him. If Jokic wants something, I'd listen to him. If Steph Curry wants something, I'd listen to him. But then there are players like, I'm not listening to that guy. Like, I don't care if I'm Miami what Tua thinks. I'm not looking to get his opinion, right? Like, the Cardinals aren't getting on the horn with Kyler Murray to ask about his free agency thoughts. But like, Andy Reid probably runs stuff by Patrick Mahomes. Same thing with the Bills with Josh Allen. Joe Burrow's earned that. So is it ideal business? Like, is this something that every GM in the league would have done? Probably not. But given their situation with Joe Burrow, like, I kind of understand. Now, the pressure on them, like, the reason that they missed the playoffs wasn't because they needed just more firepower on offense. Offense wasn't the issue. Their defense was putrid. And for as important as it is to have a great coordinator, and it is. I mean, look at the best teams the last couple of years. The Ravens with Mike McDonald, the Chiefs with Spagnuolo, the Niners in their heyday with Saleh and D'Amico. You need having elite defensive coordinators the Eagles this year with Fangio is really, really important. What that week 17 game or week 18, I get my weeks, the 17th game of the season, so week 18, what Aaron Glenn did against Sam Darnold, having a high-end defensive coordinator, there aren't many of them. But you can't be a great defensive coordinator without really, really good players. And Al Golden, like, it wasn't that long ago that Lou Anarumo was viewed as a really good coordinator. Their roster was a lot better. And you look right now, the situation with Trey Hendrickson, who's talked about like a free agent, though he's under contract, he just wants a lot more money. But he had an incredible year, and the defense sucked. It's about depth. It's about having a good defense. Look at the Eagles. Is about having high-end players, multiple, at every level. Like, you can't just have one great defensive lineman, average DB play, and like a decent linebacker. Like, you're fucked. You need multiple all-pros, and not all at the same position. So the pressure now on the Bengals with them allocating to Burrow and the two wide receivers, I mean, especially if they extend Trey Hendrickson, which seems like it's very possible, they have little room for error in the draft. The other thing is offensive linemen are expensive. So they're not going to have the cash to buy these guys on the open market. They're going to have to hit on them too. So you're going to have to hit on defensive linemen. You're going to have to hit on defensive backs. You're going to have to hit on offensive linemen in the draft. Like, if you tell me, like, what are their needs in the draft, you go O-line and defense. And don't miss, because if you do, and you only hit on a player or two in a given draft, like, it's going to be very hard for you to make up ground on these elite programs who, like you, have Hall of Fame guys at quarterback. So, like, your point of difference, which is awesome having Joe Burrow, is somewhat neutralized because the teams you have to beat have Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, and Josh Allen. I would like their chances a lot more. If you told me the Bengals were in the NFC, I'd be like, yeah, their chances is decent because they're going to have the best quarterback every time they play all the NFC teams. That's just not the case in the AFC. That doesn't mean he can't outplay those guys, but like, if those guys are on at the same time, they just cancel each other out. So I get it. I totally understand it. We're going to see if it's going to work. I think it's going to be very, very difficult, and basically their front office can't miss on any picks. Remember when you could function on 4 hours sleep? Yeah, those days are gone. But don't worry. Via's got something to help you sleep like a log, or at least stop waking up like one. Here's the thing with Via. I've been using their sleep aids for a long time. I don't know about you, but I got to be careful with THC. I like a little less in my gummies. Big fan of CBD when it comes to sleeping. And the best part about Via is you can order anything from 0 to 100 milligrams. So if you like a lot of THC in any of your products, you can max it out. And if you don't, and you're more into CBD, that's be me, especially when it comes to sleeping, you can change the ratio there. So unlock the power of nature, because Via's organic and vegan hemp extracts are perfect for relaxation and rejuvenation. I've been using these for a while. They're made in the USA, quality ingredients, affordable and accessible. Cannot recommend them enough. So if you're 21 or over, check out the link to Via in our description and use the code JOHN to receive 15% off, free shipping in orders over $100. And if you're new to Via, get a free gift of your choice. After you purchase, when they ask you where you heard of them, please support our show and tell them we sent you. Enhance your everyday with Via. We all have ego. We all have pride. And I think, especially as guys, the older you get in any line of work you do, it's gotten in the way of progress at times for all of us, and can be difficult thing to, I would say, swallow or put to the side and let common sense reign supreme. Let it drive a decision. And I think last year when they gave Kirk Cousins that contract, uh, I understand what they were doing. Honestly, I don't even blame them for doing it. They were so desperate at quarterback, or to find a quarterback. Their quarterback situation was a joke, right? Like I get the Raiders trading a third round pick for Geno and then extending him. Like they're desperate at quarterback, and he's a huge upgrade. Now the Cousins thing, unlike Geno, the guy was coming off a torn Achilles and he was older, so it was definitely risky. But I totally understood it. But then once you draft Michael Penix, it was like, okay, what's going on here? And then by the end of the year, Michael Penix your starting quarterback. And you go into the offseason, Michael Penix is your starter. And whenever OTA start in the next 3 or 4 weeks, Michael Penix will be the guy leading the charge. Now, Cousins might just say, I'm not showing up to the offseason. So I think the Falcons would say, what's the big deal? We will continue the staring contest. You can't convince me. It is not easier on everybody to not have cut him loose a couple weeks ago and just end this circus. Like, what are we really looking to get? A 6 round pick? Now, you could argue, well, hey, John, a 6 round pick's better than just cutting him and eating it. I would say just moving on as a franchise and having a solo focus on one thing, and that's doing everything humanly possible to help Michael Penix, makes it easier on everybody, the front office and the team. And if they get, I would say, anything of value, I will tip my hat and say I was wrong. I don't think that's happening. And Arthur Blank, because of his pride and ego, which again, $10 million dollars to him, I'm not crying for the guy's pocketbook, but what a waste of fucking money. And what Kirk Cousins to get $10 million dollars guaranteed in 2026. I mean, there is a chance that wherever Cousins ends up playing, because he's not going to play for the Falcons, I promise you this, he will not be the Falcons' backup at $27.5 million dollars. So he will be somewhere else whenever they inevitably trade him for a 6th or 7th round pick. You paid him $10 million dollars or guaranteed that for next year. I mean, and one, I think that also hinders his ability to get traded, because what if he is a disaster? What if it really is like it's over, which happens sometimes? I don't know. It's sports and he's old and he just can't play anymore. Because I think a lot of people go, well, it's always the year after the year after, right? So last year, coming back up the Achilles, it takes, especially a guy like him who's not a great athlete and can't really move, it's just going to take some time. But what if it never gets better? Because I remember watching Ben Roethlisberger after the arm injury, like, I'll give it a little time. And then it just never got better. Or Drew Brees as he got older. It's like, God, his shoulder looks terrible. It's like, why? They're 37, 38, 39 years old. And remove Tom Brady from the equation. That's usually what happens. So I just think this whole Falcon situation, you signed him. We all get it. You were desperate for a quarterback. You took Michael Penix. You could argue, thank God you did, or else you'd be in a situation where you have to run it back with Kirk Cousins, which no one would want to do if you're a Falcons fan. But now you're in this situation where you're just like having this, your refusal to cut him because you feel like he took advantage of you. I just think is dumb. And I think it's really being led by the owner, who is probably got to be pretty hot on this situation, given that his front office clearly convinced him to cut this money to an older player, and it blew up in their face. Couple other quick things. I mentioned this with Coward about about the rumors out there on the internet of DK Metcalf to the Chargers. This was obviously before he got traded to the Steelers, but when he had officially made his trade request, it's like Jim Harbaugh should be all over DK. Jim Harbaugh, trade a high pick, give him extension, build the offense around DK Metcalf. It's like, guys, have you watched Jim Harbaugh operate? It'd be like, why doesn't In-N-Out sell tacos? It's like, what are you guys talking about? They have 2 items on their menu: burgers and fries and milkshakes. Jim Harbaugh, offensive lineman, defensive lineman, running backs. And defense, offensive line, quarterback, play under control. He was never going to trade for DK Metcalf. Maybe if DK Metcalf would take a huge pay cut and he could be had for like a 5th-round pick, yeah, then maybe Harbaugh would have been interested. But given what the Pittsburgh Steelers traded for him, Jim Harbaugh would quit football before he made that move. A couple days later, what does Jim Harbaugh do? He signs Mekhi Becton. Mekhi Becton is the most Jim Harbaugh signing. Mekhi Becton and Najee Harris, a physical running back who just runs downhill, and an offensive lineman who was drafted in the top 15 to play tackle, resurrects his career guard, and is an absolute mauler. Honestly, reminds me a little bit, at least the version that Stoutland had him playing, of when Harbaugh had Mike Iupati, the guard who was really good before he had a devastating injury against Seattle, I think in the NFC Championship game in like 2014. But you just stood next to him. He looked like a tackle, but he played guard, and he was a mother. And this is Harbaugh. So whenever people go, why didn't Harbaugh? Guys, he's going to take linemen. Look at the last team that he had at Michigan. They had 15 players drafted. They had 6 guys on offense of line get drafted. There are only 5 guys that start. He would have had however many guys more if Mason Graham and the other defensive tackle would have been eligible last year. He likes building it in the trenches. While he's a former quarterback, he doesn't think about the passing game first. He thinks about the line of scrimmage, physicality, winning the I am going to shove you the way you don't want to go. That's the most basic level Jim Harbaugh thinks about football. That's how he operated at Stanford. That's how he operated with the 49ers. That's how he operated with Michigan. And that's how he's now operating with the Chargers. He does not want guys like DK Metcalf. He wants guys like Mekhi Becton. Like that's what he's going to want. Okay, last but not least, I saw that the SEC set a record for 14 teams getting in the NCAA tournament. And I've been on this block for a while that clearly with the NIL, now there's a lot of moving parts. It looks like revenue sharing is about to come into college football, which I think, if it's done correctly, would greatly benefit the SEC if everyone's on an equal playing field. But because right now there are some programs that are just, Texas is somewhat of an outlier and they're new to the SEC, but the Alabamas, the LSUs, it's going to be difficult for them to go up against Larry Ellison and Michigan giving Underwood $15 million, or Ohio State and Oregon with their, backing of their boosters. But the money that has been made, I would even say before the NIL era, but even still, that with the television money in the SEC, which is more than every other conference, and I've always said that Saban, really Urban started it, and then Saban took it to another level, and the SEC just started dominating college football. And their television ratings are really high, and they have the best television deal, and they make the most money by far. That their programs really benefited. So when you see that the SEC got 14 teams in the NCAA tournament, that would never have happened 20 years ago, because the SEC, beside a couple programs, they always had Kentucky, and on given stretches, Florida was really good with Billy Donovan, won some national championships, but they didn't go 6 or 7 deep. They weren't, what I grew up on, the ACC or the Big East. That's what the SEC has become. Why? Because they pay so much money. Well, where did that money come from? Football. I said this to Colin also. When I was in Nashville, I played at the Vanderbilt golf course. Their clubhouse at this golf course looks like a fucking mansion. It's not the clubhouse for the actual country club. That is, however, 3 or 4 football fields to the right. That's just for the golf team that has 12 players on it, and then has its own special little practice area, which is massive. And when I was leaving the course, I looked over, who's chipping at that practice facility? Peyton Manning. If you follow college baseball, you'll know that the SEC, the last however handful of years, has dominated college baseball. Why? Because they're paying the top coaches more money than all these other conferences. So the amount of money that's getting pumped into these programs because of the distribution from the football program has been historic. So when you look at the SEC dominating college basketball, I think this all goes back to tell Nick Saban thank you. And when I say Nick Saban thank you, because of his dominance, put so much pressure on the other programs in the conference to quadruple down on football, which they were already addicted to, has benefited everybody not in the football program at these schools.